Welcome in. This is the Indiana Convention Center. This is where the NFL Combine is happening. I just got done talking to John Lynch. So this is how it worked. He had his podium session, which lasted a little over 15 minutes. And then there was a much more, I think, revelatory conversation with John Lynch. It was just a few of us that wasn't on camera. No cameras were allowed for it. So we got much more 49ers intel there. We got some notes here for you. I'm going to instantly react this the way that I instantly react to games. But this is probably 40 plus minutes of John Lynch content between both conversations that we are going to be parsing through over the course of the next several weeks. Lynch is not going to speak again publicly in all likelihood until the owners' meetings in West Palm Beach. But we can get started with Brock Purdy. John Lynch said, quote, "We're already having good discussions," end quote, with Brock Purdy's representation when it comes to a new contract for the young 49ers quarterback. Then Lynch did later say that the talks are still in their infancy. So obviously keep everything contextualized here because whatever is happening with Brock Purdy and negotiations with the 49ers, if anything substantive is rolling, it is very, very early on in the process. Even John Lynch acknowledged that today. He, again, fell back on his usual explanations for how these things work. The 49ers have awarded the most big money contracts out of any team since John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan took over. So Lynch has been able to rest on the 49ers track record of getting these things done. And he again repeated that when there is a will from both sides to get things done, then there is a way. Then things do typically end up getting done. And I think that there's a will from the 49ers. We've heard it from John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan already. They were extremely frank about their desire to sign Brock Purdy to a long-term deal when the season ended. In a way, I feel that the 49ers have already showed their hand, and I don't think they want any beating around the bush, at least John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan don't, and we'll see how this entire situation proceeds. Lynch does not like to get into details of negotiations through the media, so that's essentially all that we're going to get from John Lynch. Again, he was candid about this. He said that discussions have started, they're good, but he also said that they're still in their infancy. He said there's no guarantees of anything getting done, but the 49ers have a very strong track record of getting these big deals done, which is true. They have engaged George Kittle's representation about an extension. Kittle is entering a lame duck year on his contract. Lynch said, "We want George to retire a 49er." George is coming up on 10 years with the team. And if and when that does happen, he'll get his name up on a wall. The 49ers have yet to put a 10-year player up on the wall under this regime. Well, actually, Joe Staley got up on the wall. He was, 2007 to 2019. But there hadn't been a homegrown player of the Lynch-Shanahan regime that has stuck around for 10 years because they haven't been around for 10 years. So Kittle was in the first class, draft class, 5th round, after a good combine here in Indianapolis. That was in 2017. And if he can last for the 49ers through the 2026 seasons, that means they're going to need a new contract to last beyond 2025. He will be a 10-year player that goes up on the wall in that hallway in the 49ers facility. Obviously a priority for San Francisco this offseason as he is entering the lame duck season of that contract. Christian McCaffrey, according to John Lynch, is doing great in his recovery. He's very motivated, just like Trent Williams. Mike, why don't you toss Trent Williams into the title if we didn't toss him into the title earlier? Because this is, people for some reason have over and over again tried to start the stupid rumor that Trent Williams is thinking about retiring while ignoring the fact that Trent, when he re-signed with the 49ers before this last season, said that he wants to play until age 40. Trent's 36, he's my age. So Trent still feels that he's got about a half a decade of football at least left in him. He's still playing at a really high level. So these retirement rumors have really come out of nowhere. Lynch said that Trent Williams is definitely back and motivated. And the 49ers also feel that their offensive line is going to play much better when Trent Williams is back and healthy next year. They feel that some of the drop-off that we saw toward the end of last season, maybe much of the drop-off, and might I even say most of the drop-off, happened because big number 71 wasn't there at left tackle. So the 49ers obviously putting a lot of hope on the continuous return of Trent Williams, right? Because yes, he's going to be playing next year, but you also have to hope that he stays healthy for the vast majority of the season. Injuries have been an issue, not just for Williams, but for the rest of the team. But they believe that that could be one of the rising tides that lifts all boats. Now, I will say that Trent is only under contract through 2026. Colton McKivitz is only under contract through this next season, 2025. I think this is the draft where the 49ers pick a tackle, and maybe with some more valuable draft capital to match what they really need as a football team. So, San Francisco is in a position where the offensive line actually on the aggregate pass blocked better this past season than in 2023. I mean, the efficiency scores were 13 and 14 for the offensive line, but the weaknesses shifted for the line, right? Whereas the right side was atrocious in 2023. It got better with Dominic Puni. I think he helped Colton McKivitz at right tackle. It was left guard that got worse, and then obviously Trent Williams got hurt, so left tackle saw that regression. So the 49ers need to even out the performance and continue an upward trajectory for the pass protection, and they also have to make sure that the run blocking is up to par, because this past season was the worst year for the 49ers in terms of first down run efficiency since 2017. That was Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch's first year. So that's all part of the puzzle with the offensive line. And you know who else is included in that equation is Christian McCaffrey, who wasn't available. I do have to mention, I asked John Lynch in our conversation, the second one, the one that wasn't on camera, about Jordan Mason. And he was a really good runner for the 49ers last year. He, just like Christian McCaffrey, also got hurt. And I think that was a big part of the 49ers drop to number 20 in first down run efficiency, which of course had a downstream effect, hurting everything that the 49ers were trying to do offensively when we talk about the situation around Brock Purdy. So Mason, who ran so well when he was healthy, but wasn't the receiving threat that Christian McCaffrey or even Isaac Guerendo was, what did the 49ers plan to do with him? Because he is an restricted free agent. He's going to be an RFA coming up when the new league year starts in exactly 2 weeks. Is San Francisco going to try to finish a deal with Jordan Mason before the RFA process? Are they going to go original round tender? Are they going to go second round tender, which would be more expensive? That would cost $7 to $8 million for a running back who's, I would say running back too. He's earned that respect, but Isaac Guerendo is emerging. They're obviously both behind Christian McCaffrey. You wouldn't have any flexibility with the restricted free agent cap hit because that'd be $7 million flat fee for the 1 year. You'd want to, I think, shuffle around some of the cap money, push it into the future. The 49ers have the second most money in void years in the entire NFL. It's them and the Eagles who are pushing all this money ahead, and you have to sign your own contract. You can't go with the preset template of the restricted free agent deal. So when I asked John about it, he said that all options were still on the table, but I really do think, based on his answer, that he would prefer for something to get done sooner. If they could potentially get Jordan Mason at that discount, the 49ers would be over the moon, because the RFA price might be a little too steep. The cap situation might not be the flexible Tetris piece that the 49ers want to fit into their 2025 plans. Also asked about Dre Greenlaw and Talanoa Hufanga. One thing that I asked John was like, hey, Nick Bosa said at the Pro Bowl that Robert Saleh was, quote unquote, adamant to get Dre Greenlaw back. Because Saleh was on the staff in 2019 when the 49ers discovered Dre Greenlaw, the Senior Bowl. There's obviously a big-time connection there. Saleh has a linebacker coach's background. He's seen film of how bad the 49ers were defensively last year. They dropped to number 29 against the run. A huge, huge part of their struggles were the run defense. So, and the linebackers, right? Like the huge part of their struggles were the linebackers in terms of that run defense. So, I think Robert Saleh knows as well as anybody that the 49ers have to fortify that second level of the defense. And John joked when I asked him about Bosa's comments about Saleh being adamant about Greenlaw coming back. He says that wasn't part of Saleh's negotiation with the 49ers. But he does know how important Greenlaw is to Saleh. Now, we've talked about other options, and maybe these are options that you'd have to sign on top of Dre Greenlaw, just because there are some injury questions. He only played 34 snaps this past season, but Jamie Sherwood played for the Jets under Robert Saleh. Of course, the 49ers aren't allowed to talk about players who are still technically under contract with other teams. And somebody like Sherwood, somebody like Bobby Wagner, who has played on a Saleh team with the Seattle Seahawks back in 2013, they're still technically under contract with their former teams, and they will be until 2 weeks from now when the new league year starts. So right now, John Lynch can only talk about existing players still under contract with the 49ers. And he did say that, yes, they're very interested in bringing Greenlaw back. They're very interested in bringing Hufanga back. They've been in contact with representation for both of those players. But we'll just have to wait and see how the market unfolds. And after talking to Lynch today, I actually feel a little bit more optimistic about the 49ers' chances to bring Dre Greenlaw back. I think Talanoa Hufanga is actually less likely, but both are still possible. Greenlaw, that's been kind of the vacillating meter, right, over the course of the past couple months. There's been the social media post from Dre Greenlaw's family that, people thought to be a good buy. I think it was just a foray into uncertainty in this offseason. Then there's been the Saleh adamant quote from Nick Bosa, which made people think it was more likely he was going to return. And then a little bit, past that over the past couple of weeks, it just, the vibes that we've collected from social media have been less optimistic. Now John Lynch has talked, and I will say that it's still somewhere in between, and even the 49ers don't know for sure, but the market is really going to start materializing here over the next couple of weeks. Over the next few days, agents and executives, Lynch and Greenlaw's representation are probably going to meet here in Indianapolis, and we'll get a much firmer read on this situation. In terms of Brandon Aiyuk, there's a big marker coming up in a couple weeks with Dr. Neil Elatrosh, who performed his ACL and MCL repair surgery. Aiyuk is going to go through this Neil Elatrosh test in a couple weeks, this is probably the most accomplished ACL doctor that's active today. He works down in LA, and he performed Aiyuk's surgery, and he has a benchmark test at around 2 weeks from now that he performs on all of his patients, and Brandon Aiyuk is going to go through that test in a couple weeks. John Lynch said that elite athletes heal at faster rates, and that he considers Brandon Aiyuk to be in that category. And it sounds like they're optimistic that this test that Aiyuk is going to undergo with Dr. Neil Elatrosh is actually going to put him ahead of schedule. Does that mean a return for week 1? We don't know yet. I think it's going to be imperative to learn exactly the results of this test in a couple weeks to put a definite timeline on Brandon Aiyuk, but that definite timeline is not going to be possible until he undergoes this benchmark test. And obviously, Elatrosh has such a good track record that I think that it's going to be possible for the 49ers to get a firm gauge on when Brandon Aiyuk might return, maybe even before the start of free agency, if this test is coming up in a couple weeks. But definitely they'll have a firmer idea before the draft, which is, I think, is really important for how they fortify this team for the 2025 season. Remember, the biggest weakness for the 49ers in 2024 statistically was the lack of separation, and that was directly tied to Brandon Aiyuk's injury, Christian McCaffrey's injury. 49ers ranked dead last in average separation at the time of catch. Somebody's asking me, can I ask John Lynch about a hypothetical trade for Myles Garrett? No, I can't ask him about that because he's not allowed to talk about players under contract with other teams. That would be tampering. So one thing, it was a 40-plus minute session if you combine both of the sessions with John Lynch today. And the one thing that he can't talk about are the players on other teams. So everybody's going to be interested in Myles Garrett. Everybody's going to be interested in Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack. Earlier today, I was talking about Trey Hendrickson. There's a chance the Bengals might trade him. He was the NFL sacks leader last year, but that's all out of bounds for NFL executives. They can't publicly talk about those players. I do know that the 49ers would be interested in Myles Garrett, but John Lynch can't go out and publicly talk about that. Here's another one, Jake Moody. I asked about Jake Moody. And I said, he really struggled after the high ankle sprain last year. Does that mean that the 49ers are going to be compelled to bring in competition at the kicker position? And John Lynch said that we do believe, this is a quote, we do believe that the injury, the high ankle sprain, had a lot to do with Jake Moody's struggles. So the 49ers still really believe in Jake Moody, but John did not rule out the possibility of the 49ers bringing in competition for Jake Moody. So I think things are going to go the way that I predicted them to go over the past couple months. I think the 49ers will indeed bring in another kicker this offseason, probably through free agency. Could be undrafted free agency after the draft. But Lynch did repeat that he believes that Moody will prevail if there is a competition. He believes the cream will rise to the top, and he believes that he is going to be a successful 49ers kicker moving forward. The injury thing is, I think, really necessary context that nobody wants to bring up outside of this channel on social media. But Moody started 14 of 15 this past year before the high ankle sprain. Lynch today, when I asked him about this, said the 49ers even turned to soccer experts to figure out, injury experts to figure out how that high ankle sprain exactly was impacting Jake Moody's mechanics, because this happened on his kicking leg. And it flummoxed the 49ers. There was even a notion from John Lynch that a frustration from San Francisco that they allowed Moody to come back too early this past year. He thinks that, okay, maybe he should have sat out for a longer period of time, because if the injury, even if it was physically healed, if it was still in his head, that could have had some downstream effects. Regardless, the 49ers, they still have Moody under contract for 2 more years. Wouldn't make much sense just to cut him. They've got a 90-man roster. They got plenty of space for him right now. And based on what Lynch told me in response to my question, they do believe that some time away, a full reset from the high ankle sprain can be what Jake Moody needs to get back on track. He was 14 of 15 before the injury and 11 of 20 after. So that's the stance of the 49ers in this situation. We've covered Brian Griese yesterday. There's a little bit more insight here for you on the whole Brian Griese situation. He initially gave the 49ers a 3-year commitment in 2022. He was unsure after 2022 if he was going to be able to hold through for more than 1 year. He wanted to give more time to his family. Coaching is extremely time intensive. He did end up giving the 49ers those 3 years, but this was it. And John brought up some very fascinating context regarding Brian Griese. He had that head coaching interview opportunity, the request from the New York Jets, and he said no. And John said, hey, Brian, this is a head coaching interview. Shouldn't you, at least just out of curiosity, go out there and take the interview? And Griese told Lynch it would be disingenuous to interview with the Jets because I don't want to coach at least this next season. So I think that shows something about Brian Griese's character. And he was the one that imparted a lot of the tutelage about leadership and, just even-keeledness to Brock Purdy and to Trey Lance and to Sam Darnold, who really gave Griese a lot of credit for that. I think the 49ers had a really, really solid leader in that room. And I think that him, Griese just denying the Jets the interview because he wasn't planning to coach anyway, instead of just doing it for the hell of it. I hadn't considered that aspect of it, and I didn't know that exact background, but the fact that Griese told Lynch that'd be disingenuous, I'm not going to interview with them, I think is a credit to Brian Griese. The 49ers feel extremely fortunate, according to Lynch, that Mick Lombardi, who has coordinator experience, is aboard to succeed Brian Griese as quarterback's coach. And I would offer that the career trajectory of Brock Purdy can potentially benefit from an X's and O's QB coach, like a guy that used to be a coordinator. He was a coordinator for 2 years with the Raiders before he came to the 49ers in 2024, Mick Lombardi. I think that Griese was the perfect QB coach for the first 3 years of Brock Purdy's career, in that in 2022, when they brought Griese aboard, Trey Lance was entering his first year as starter, and the 49ers had just picked Purdy at 262. You had somebody who would walk the walk as a QB in the NFL. I mean, he was the predecessor to Tom Brady at Michigan, and then he was the successor to John Elway under Mike Shanahan in Denver. Great for the young QBs, for Lance, for Purdy, and then for Darnold in 2023 to learn from Griese. I think Purdy is at the graduate level now of his NFL education. And since Brian Greasy no longer wants to coach, I think the perfect successor is somebody with true schematic X's and O's coaching background. And the 49ers feel very fortunate that Mick Lombardi is in that role. Drake Jackson update. John Lynch said that it's just been a troublesome return from the quad tendon repair. It was a knee surgery for Drake Jackson. There's still hope that he can be back for the 49ers this year, but Lynch did express that it was a similar repair as Mike McGlinchey had to go through between 2021 and 2022. And I guess McGlinchey to this day still feels some pain in the quad and the knee area. He's now playing for the Denver Broncos. But Drake Jackson's return has featured even more trouble than that one. And for obvious reasons, the 49ers, I don't think, are counting on Drake Jackson to be back, but there is still some hope that he can be part of the edge rushing equation. There's a lot of edge rushers here at this NFL Combine in Indianapolis. There's a lot of defensive tackles here. Lynch said that he thought the defensive tackle market is going to draw premium financial interest in free agency, which is interesting to me because defensive tackle has 41 invitees to this NFL Combine. It's a historically deep NFL Combine defensive tackle class. So you would think that if there are more quality rookies entering the pool, that maybe the price of free agents would be depressed. This was in response to a question about Javon Hargrave, who the 49ers are going to designate for a post-June 1st cut, but they're going to try to bring back at a lower price. Lynch thinks that Hargrave might still price himself out of the 49ers market just because defensive tackle is such a premium position. And, Aaron Donald changed the way that people look at this game. Everybody said, okay, we need athleticism at edge rusher. That's been something that's evolved over the course of the past 2 decades. And Aaron Donald showed up weighing 260, 265 pounds, a good 40 pounds lighter than the average defensive tackle of his time, and started beating all these guards with athleticism. So now the whole athleticism thing applies to DTs as well. And it's become a premium position in its own right. So 49ers should have pick of the litter in the defensive tackle room, but John Lynch says that it's still going to come at a premium in free agency despite that, which I thought was really interesting. One thing that Lynch said twice today, because I had 2 sessions with Lynch, right? I had the podium session and I had the one where the cameras weren't allowed, and you can go and watch the one where the cameras were allowed. I was the first to post the entire 20 minutes or so with John Lynch, so you could see exactly what he said. But multiple times, John Lynch said, you've got to step back and recalibrate as far as looking at the roster from a financial perspective. And when we talk about recalibrating, well, the 49ers obviously have to pay Brock Purdy. They've given out massive contracts over almost every season since 2018, really. Yeah. In 2018, they paid Jimmy Garoppolo record money. 19, Dee Ford came aboard for a lot of money. 2020, Kittle. 21, Fred Warner and Trent Williams. 2022, Deebo Samuel. 2023 was Nick Bosa. 2024 was Brandon Aiyuk. And 2025 is going to be Purdy in all likelihood, as, again, 49ers and Brock Purdy are, according to John Lynch, are already having good discussions, although that's still in its infancy. But when you are racking up these bills, you could push void money into the future, but it's like the sink theory, right? The sink of every season can overfill if you don't drain enough into restructures and pushes into next year. And if your faucet is coming on too hard, then you're obviously going to have to rein it back. So step back and recalibrate was the line that John Lynch used multiple times in our conversations today. And he used it in response to a question about Kyle Juszczyk too. I'm gonna have to go back and listen to the exact answer, but he didn't commit. Juszczyk is still under contract for this season. He didn't commit anything even Kyle Juszczyk, who's not making all too much money this season. It's not a huge expenditure, but step back and recalibrate. That was a refrain from John Lynch. And I think that it's an obvious one, but it's still a notable one when the GM is openly talking like that. This is going to be an offseason where the 49ers have to look long and hard at different things. Deebo Samuel being one of them. He didn't rule out a Deebo Samuel return, but it seems exceedingly likely. Deebo Samuel has indeed requested a trade from the 49ers. And this trade request, the 49ers are likely to oblige because I've talked about this over the past couple weeks. It makes sense for both sides. Deebo's not a great separator. Deebo, I mean, his hallmark is being a bulldozer. He wasn't as good of a bulldozer this past season for various reasons, probably a lot of them injury related. But the 49ers need to pair their receiving room in the most efficient fashion with Brock Purdy. And Brock Purdy is a timing QB. He, in many ways, is a touch quarterback, but he also is an off-schedule guy that relies on separation, and an off-schedule guy, when he does have to go off schedule, obviously Kyle Shanahan doesn't want that to happen on every play, but this is not the Jimmy Garoppolo era where the 49ers were obsessed with the quick release, with the screen passes, with let's get the ball to Deebo Samuel and let him wreck the field. That was 2021. To a certain extent, that was 2022. But as things have evolved under Brock Purdy, especially this past season when he really started putting this capability on full display, the 49ers have tried to combine his intermediate prowess with his off-schedule abilities with as much separation as possible. They didn't have it last year after guys got hurt. Deebo Samuel being one of the guys got hurt, but he continued playing. But he really struggled in that expanded role without Brandon Aiyuk and without Christian McCaffrey opening up space. So it just makes sense that the 49ers are looking for a change in weaponry. And Deebo, given some of his frustrations this past season, makes sense that he's looking for a change in scenery. If the 49ers aren't interested in extending him at the price that he thinks he's worth, entering a lame duck year on his contract, they're going to be looking to move on from him. And John Lynch did say that there's been a lot of interest around the league for Deebo Samuel. So all fascinating stuff. Lynch did confirm that entire thing. And then he did talk a little bit about Robert Saleh. The 49ers put on the full court press to get Saleh back. That obviously is a massive get for the 49ers this offseason, because if we look at the actual weaknesses of this team, yes, separation on offense, and that's why they're trying to reconstruct the receiving room, or at least change the dynamic with Deebo Samuel, and he's probably not going to be around. Ricky Pearsall is going to take a step up. They're hoping that Brandon Aiyuk hits his markers in this return, but the separation is what they have to take care of offensively. We've talked about the offensive line, but defensively, the run defense, and special teams wise, I mean, that number 32 ranking has to be rectified. So Brant Boyer's the new special teams coordinator. Saleh gave him a recommendation that was a reference in the process, because Saleh was the coach in New York while Brant Boyer was the special teams coordinator. And then Robert Saleh was obviously the head coach and defensive architect alongside Jeff Ulbrich of a successful Jets defense, and obviously he coordinated a successful 49ers defense before that. So Saleh is back, and during that entire process, John Lynch told Robert Saleh, I feel like I'm getting sloppy eighths with you, not sloppy seconds or sloppy thirds. I feel this is sloppy eighths, because Robert Saleh was in the head coaching interview circuit, but he didn't get that Jacksonville job. Liam Cohen ended up going to Jacksonville. He didn't get the Raiders job. Pete Carroll ended up going to the Raiders. And all joking aside, the 49ers got their sloppy eighths with Robert Saleh. John Lynch was laughing about that today. He is aboard as their defensive coordinator. That was one of the biggest weaknesses, the number 26 defense. They moved on from Nick Sorensen. Robert Saleh is in that position now, and they obviously fired Brian Schneider from the special teams coordinator role, and Robert Saleh helped them bring in Brant Boyer. So anyway, George Kittle, he will re-sign with the 49ers this offseason. That's something they're already talking about with Kittle's representation. The goal is to have George Kittle retire a 49er. 49ers are already having good discussions with Brock Purdy's representation, but that is still in its infancy. That is according to John Lynch. That's the word from John Lynch, that his exact quote, we're already having good discussions with Brock Purdy on a new contract. Christian McCaffrey doing great in his recovery. He should be a participant, at least in a limited fashion, in this offseason program. The 49ers are obviously going to try to be smart with him. Trent Williams, definitely back and motivated for the 49ers in 2025. He had a bone bruise in his ankle joint this past year. It sounded really painful. That's what kept Trent Williams out late in the season, but he's definitely back according to John Lynch, and Lynch thinks that's going to make the entire offensive line better. Brandon Aiyuk has got a big recovery marker coming up in a couple weeks with Dr. Neil Elatrosh as he tries to come back from his knee injury. 49ers should have intel on his return date before the NFL draft at the latest, which I think is really important for offseason plans. Drake Jackson, quad tendon repair. He's been obviously having some trouble, missed all of last season. There still is hope that Drake Jackson can come back and contribute to the 49ers, although they're not counting on it for 2025. Dre Greenlaw, Tano Hufanga, 49ers in contact with representation for both of those players here in Indianapolis. That's going to really start to come to fruition. I think the 49ers hope they might be able to get something done with one of those two players at least, maybe both of them, but maybe one of those two players before the start of free agency in a couple of weeks. Jordan Mason, 49ers exploring all options. Again, he's going to be a restricted free agent. I discussed that earlier in the show if you're just joining, so go ahead and rewind, watch the entire thing. Jake Moody, 49ers do believe his injury, his high ankle sprain, had a lot to do with his struggles. Because of that, they think that they believe in Jake Moody, but Lynch did not rule out bringing in competition. Even if they do bring in competition, Lynch thinks that Moody will win it. I'm just telling you, this is coming straight from the horse's mouth. 49ers do still believe in Moody. They're not just going to cut him this offseason. They feel very, very lucky to have Mick Lombardi ready to succeed Brian Griese, who has stepped away to be with his family more often. Coaching takes a lot of energy and a lot of time. So Mick Lombardi is sliding into that role, and the 49ers are really happy that he's got coordinator experience. I think that could be the next step in Brock Purdy's development. And they obviously have Robert Saleh back, even if it feels like sloppy eighths for John Lynch. Anyway, this is the NFL Combine. If you guys want a look outside the Indiana Convention Center, there you go. Nice little church. This is Indianapolis. That was John Lynch. I've got to roll right now. That's your instant reaction. We're going to have much more tonight from the studio. We're going to break down the nitty gritty. There's a lot to go through, but I figured everything might be in a concise spot for you here. And you also have the video portion of the interview. But remember, this was based, what I just gave you was based on a conversation where cameras were not allowed. So recordings and cameras, I don't think you're allowed to post the recording of that. That was a conversation that I could relay to you right here to keep things proper between us and John Lynch. There's your 49ers intel. Everybody hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. We'll talk to you soon.